Morning, everyone. Morning. What a nice crowd. I'm going to pray. Here we go. Holy God, the rain has ended and the sun has come up, and we gather in the light of your love and the warmth and presence of one another. We give thanks for a time to pause in the busy realities of life, to think back, to renew and refresh our memories, and to hear stories about the people that you have named Tree of Life. We thank you for this time together and pray your blessing upon us as we talk and discuss these matters together. In your Son's name we pray. So, this is now the second class, the second time I've gone through the same routine. I sit down, I think, what am I going to talk about? And there are just so many things to talk about. I just can't, how do you consolidate going on 37 years together in the 4 Sunday school classes? So I'm going to do my best. Kathy's here. She's going to chip in. That surprises you, right?
Correct. What do you mean other than correcting it?
There's a book titled We Are Still Married.
And she got applause last night.
Yes, she did.
I was
Yes,
going to
she
say
did.
that this morning. I thought, no, I won't do that to him in front of everybody.
There you
But
go.
yeah.
Make sure
Thank you.
everybody
Thank you, Jill.
knows.
Council tape too.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So I'm going to try this morning to refresh your memories and give you some new ones, some new thoughts about the theme of artifacts and events. Next week, my goal will be to talk about people. I'm going to recall to the congregation, to the assembly here, just some of the interesting people stories we've had along the way. And of course, 36.
Very afraid.
36.
No.
We've had plenty of them. So about, I have all these show and tell pieces to pass around. So I'm going to start out with that one. So I'll pass things around, do your best to catch a glimpse. But I'm going to talk a little bit about this building first. So we broke ground for the building on May 5th, 1991, 5/5/91. We stood somewhere out there on the far edge of the parking lot. Bishop Edmonston was here. The staff person at that time who was assigned the Tree of Life, Pastor Al Ellersbush. Anybody remember him? Al Ellersbush. He was here. Our new mission director, Jared Hansen, was here from the ELCA. We had a trombone choir. I mentioned that. Michael May, who's not here, but who sang in the choir, along with a trombonist friend of the congregation from Lakeside Lutheran, Tom Asman. They formed the trombone choir. Kathy's mom, I remember a picture of her kneeling out there, during the ceremony in her white shirt and her khaki pants. Is that in the same book?
That's in the book,
Yeah. An interesting tidbit about the congregation or the building. Here we are, we're located. Susan, there are folding chairs right over there. Oh,
There's some up here.
There's
If you can
chairs
call
over there,
through.
more comfortable chairs.
An interesting tidbit about this building, we're up high. We are parallel to Linglestown Road, but in the original landscape of this new building, we were perpendicular to Linglestown Road. So the building was actually over at the far end of the parking lot. Front door would have been facing Far Green Road, and the parking lot would have been in front of it. There were questions raised by our neighbors above us, largely in Mountaindale, about the presence of a church on this site. The public line was that a church here would bring
There are
down.
seats in here. Or pull up Yeah, folding chairs, sorry.
Nicholas was in church last night.
Yeah.
He is back for Sunday
Look at
school today.
Nicholas.
Nicholas, that
He's
is like
becoming a young man.
record breaking.
That's Nicholas.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize all these
No.
kids
I
that were at.
know.
Yeah.
Nicholas is a young man. There was, the Mountaindale Civic Association articulated publicly the fear that the presence of a church on the corner would bring down property values. That was what they brought to the township. I'm just saying that to you because there are building sensitivities, right? Nearly wherever you go. I remember years later that a group bought an old mansion on Front Street, and their goal was to house truant teenagers in the building, and it, oh my, it just generated. So I'm not really critiquing that. I'm just saying that the church faced that too, and surprising. And the other thing that they were concerned about was that the presence of the church here would generate too much traffic. Think back to 1991 in Mountaindale. Who lived there?
All Jewish.
It was a very, very Jewish neighborhood. If you would have stood on Far Green Road on Sunday morning, you might have been lucky to see a car or two. There just wasn't a big traffic flow on Sunday mornings down Far Green Road, but there was this fear of the church. Interestingly enough, as I told you last time, the property was bought in 1971. The church owned this land before many of the houses were north.
And interestingly enough, my dad was one of the people standing on the property when they
Kathy's
chose
dad was there
back in
representing the church
1971.
with Tozer the closer.
Yeah.
You know, what the irony of the argument is, when you look at some of these properties as you're going toward where, you know, Mountaindale truly is, the church actually probably raised their property values.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, generally, the presence of a church doesn't bring down property values. Just- And I think in retrospect, very few of the folks who represented that organization are around anymore. Several have died by now, or moved away. One of the young women on that organization she was a good friend of ours because we had kids in the same age group. At any rate, I think in retrospect, those kinds of things would never be said today. Tree of Life has been exceptional neighbors. Every now and then we'll get complaint if there's a trash overflow or something like that, but beyond that, not so much. Our last Sunday in Herbert Hoover School was November 24th, 1991. First Sunday in the new building, 12/1/91. And yeah. So this is a photograph. I'll go this way this time. That's a photograph of our first Sunday in the building. We weren't in this space because the pews hadn't been installed yet. So we set up folding chairs yet again in the fellowship hall, and that's where he had church. We made it into the sanctuary by December 15th. We dedicated the building on January 12th, 1992. We began a week-long dedication of the building beginning on January 12th. It lasted 2 weeks until January 25th. The actual dedication service was in between on the 19th. And attendance that day in this worship space, minus about where Bob is sitting over to this wall. So from him going forward.
Well, this wasn't here.
Right.
Yeah.
So from him going forward, we had 400 people in here.
Wow.
So we broke every fire code. Chairs everywhere.
Tradition.
Yeah.
Some of the things about the building. A church architect had to draw an artistic rendering of the church. We met with an ELCA building consultant. Then we brought in the ELCA architect to develop an artistic rendering. That was the point where the building committee really began to struggle, because there was a member of the building committee who had brought a complete architectural drawing of a church that was built up in Halifax, and he supplied all the lumber for that church. So he knew what that building would look like. He knew the design. We actually went up to visit it. We debated it, but at the end of the day, we liked what the church was developing, because the architect sat down with us, our building committee, and with subcommittees, and asked the question, well, what purpose does the building serve? So, you know, we talk about wanting a place to eat. We talked about wanting a play space. We talked about a worship space that created a degree of intimacy. So the design that was presented to us by a building committee member, fellowship hall in the basement, low ceilings, worship space would have been about seating capacity this size, but it would have been long and narrow.
It also wouldn't fit on our property.
And
That
in
was the other.
at the end of the day, it
Yeah.
wouldn't even have been allowed on our property.
Yeah, so we need to
But
have so
the
much
worship
green
leaders
space.
would be at the top of the steps, you know, way up there. It would have been difficult to make eye contact, you know, with folks. Don't you like it when I can look you eyeball to eyeball and make fun of Bob Thompson and Gary Funk? So we went with that design. We had a meeting and presented both designs to the congregational meeting, and one of our members boldly stood up and said, I vote in favor of the ELCA design. That was the decision of the congregation, with maybe just 2 or 3 exceptions. We had hired an architectural firm to flesh it out. We interviewed 3 or 4 architects, including the Bink brothers. Do you remember them from Camp Hill? They were very popular with church designs at that time, really nice guys. But we ended up going with a firm from Chambersburg. Does anybody remember the name? Noker and Hall. John gets a star in his crown. So Harold Noker, he was a die-hard, old-time architect, big guy, friendly, but he had a young architect on his staff named Mike Hall. And Mike Hall, when he met with the building committee, he won them over very, very quickly. So just, again, your memories, once I leave, Mike Hall was the architect for the chapel at Camp David. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? Mike Hall was the architect for the cathedral in San Francisco after it came down in the earthquake. So he had a wonderful resume. Both Harold, who was Lutheran, and Mike, who was Roman Catholic, spoke the language of faith, and they just, you know, it was pretty obvious when we met them, I think, that the building committee would go with that. The building, as it was built, was 10,600 square feet. We interviewed a number of contractors, including Mr. Custer from Mountaindale. So Stan Custer Jr. by then was leading the charge. And you know what? They had never built a church, but we really liked the idea of having a neighbor do it. The problem is, they had never built a church. And they had no idea how to bid this out. So their bid was probably twice as high as the next. You know, it just wasn't going to happen. It was a pipe dream. We did not hire the low bid. We hired the next low bid from a company in Lemoyne. Anybody remember them? Do you remember them, John? Wasn't Lobar, but we interviewed them. Aren't they down in Dillsburg? Are they Dillsburg? And they actually were the low bid. Lobar was the low bid. But when we interviewed all these folks, we asked them certain questions. We asked them if we could get a solid wood ceiling in the worship space. we asked them how we could get the full fellowship hall, if they had a plan for that. Because we didn't have enough money, we thought, to do that and or do that. And these were of concern to us. The church building consultant told us, forget the fellowship hall. Lutherans don't eat anymore. Well, yeah. He was from New Jersey. They don't eat in New Jersey.
We argued with them.
He got struck down by the goddess sauerkraut.
Nice guy, but he clearly hadn't visited central Pennsylvania in a while.
They really do eat all over the country.
I know.
Lutherans.
So anyways, we hired this firm, Miller and Norford, because they said yes to that they could get that tidbit of information. This was the last solid wood church ceiling that this company, Miller and Norford, put in. They did not put in one after it. The ceiling is made out of yellow poplar, and that was the last one they installed. About the fellowship hall, they came back with the answer. They said, if you put these wooden trusses in over there, you could get the full fellowship hall. They would save so much money by using those kinds of trusses rather than a traditional frame truss ceiling. And we would actually gain height on it. So if you're playing volleyball, right, as people do here, that worked really well. So we ended up hiring Nolker and Hall. So along the way, we did some renovations. Those of you who are sitting in that corner are sitting in the original rose garden. In the original building, there was a notch in there, and there was a rose garden with a pretty fountain that ran all the time. I think maybe John Paul bought the fountain, and it was very lovely. But when we bought the office across the street, we could move things out of this building and over there. And we knew we needed more worship space at that time. I went back and I looked at the records. I wish I could remember the year. I didn't write it down, but it was back in the early 2000s. Tree of Life reached the apex of its average worship attendance. We topped off at 345 a weekend. That was a lot of people in church, and we were fighting for space at that time, even with the 3 services. The Saturday service had started, had already existed for a long time, but it wasn't quite catching the attention that it did years later. So we had just about 60 people here last night to hear Kathy preach, and to clap their hands. You have no idea how much I'm going to hear that now. Yeah. So when we bought that, we could extend this outward, which is what we did. Those windows used to be coming across where Bob and I are sort of sitting, and this was all narthex. And basically the narthex, where the corner of the office there goes across and down to the fellowship, towards the fellowship hall, that was my office. So we took out my office, we were able to move it over there. We lost the rose garden, which is sort of sad. And but we got this added worship space, so room for another 20 to 30 people on a Christmas Eve, right? We bought the tree house in 1995. We voted to purchase it on January 8th, 1995. You heard a little bit last week about how it landed again for us. It's 1,500 square feet. It's basically a 2-bedroom house. Big garage, full basement, but not really a finished basement. If you want to see it at some point while it's empty, Randy would be happy to take you on a tour, but you should bring a bucket of spick and span with you and some
You can help clean.
to wipe the basement.
It's not
with.
that bad.
Not too bad,
It is cleaned up now.
yeah. It's 1.4 acres. This, by the way, is 2.65, so original church site, 2.65. And did everybody see the first worship? Pass it back this way.
You did see, sorry.
We did see it.
So we burned the mortgage for the treehouse 5 years later. That's pretty remarkable. The purchase price was $123,000, I think. So, you know, my hunch is if we'd sell it now, we'd probably maybe even double our money with that much land.
At least that's
At
nice.
least. So 5 years later, we paid it off. We paid it off on the 12th anniversary of First Worship. And was anybody there? We did it during the pasta dinner, and we were in the fellowship hall.
Yeah.
And Tom Thorwart recited an ode to the treehouse. Time and time again, he is proving himself to be a poet. We bought the office on June 5th, 2002. Carol tracked that down this week. The purchase price was $585,000. So if you remember this story, earlier in the year, we had brought the congregation a motion from council to take out a loan to add an addition to this building. The addition would have been immense. Chapel, office suite, classrooms, more classrooms. We were short on classrooms at that time. And the bill would have been significant, about $2 million. The congregation basically thumbed their noses at leadership and said, no way. And I have said 1,000,000 times since COVID, I am so happy that that was an unanswered prayer. Because had we done that, can you imagine the kind of debt load that we would be carrying now as a congregation? So that was definitely an instance where it turned out that the congregation was right. They suggested we come back with a plan for $1 million. But the problem was, 2 million or 1 million, we knew that over $400,000 would go into site development just to take care of the water and the dirt, the hill behind us. And it seemed like an awful lot of money to spend on moving dirt for an addition, $1 million addition that would have ended up netting us 3,000 square feet. So that was pretty pricey. As God or someone would have it, I noticed for several days that there was nobody in the parking lot at Dr. Ulrich and Dr. Castle's office. I knew Dr. Castle, called him up. I said, Dr. Castle, what's going on? You haven't had any traffic flow. Are you guys on vacation or something? And he started to sob on the phone. He said, Pastor Geib, Dr. Ulrich and I have retired. We've come to the hard conclusion that we need to just close the office down. Did everybody see our own little attempt to clear the land? So I'm not sure exactly.
That's Rebecca Kapraki.
That's Rebecca in the
Yeah.
front. I can't tell who the others
Hold
are.
on, give it to me.
Kathy.
Really look at it.
Then you can applaud her. Lost my mind. Oh, the doctors concluded that the remaining staff
It's hard to tell.
would not carry on the spirit of that practice because they were missionary doctors. They took a month every year, traveled to Costa Rica, and did missionary work. And so they decided to close it down and sell the property. And I said, well, you know, Dr. Castle, would you be interested in talking to our church in case they would be interested in buying it? And now the sobbing really continued. He started to sob on the phone. He said, Pastor Geib, that would be the best thing ever. you could do that. So 585,000, 7,500 square feet. 1,003,000 square feet. It seemed like a no-brainer, right? There were a couple naysayers, mainly because we needed Sunday school space at that time, and children would be crossing the street. So we knew that we would only send older children across the street. So it was mainly the confirmation students, and back in the day, we had
Yeah.
senior high Sunday
Yeah.
school. The adult class, for a while, met in the lobby out there. We did realize it was hard for some of our members to make that walk. So eventually, adult Sunday school regrouped over here. So, we had a member come forward and say to us, who was pleased about this decision, and it was a couple, a man and a woman, members, married, one-time members of Epiphany Lutheran Church, and prominently situated in the community, I would say. He was a developer, she was a real estate agent. And they came and said, how about if we give 100,000 as soon as you raise 100,000? So we raised 100,000, they gave 100,000, and we quickly reduced our mortgage from 585 to 385. I mean, you can look back on that moment and say that's really why we paid that building off. Was it this year or last year? Losing track of time.
I think it was last year.
Yeah, that's it, 2022. So we got that matching fund, and that helped a whole lot. Carol says that we moved into that building in 2002, August. So we moved across the street and relocated there, and
Well, if
again,
Carol says it, it's right.
it's gotta be true.
Yeah, but Sue told me also, so she
Oh,
confirmed
then
it.
it's,
No?
So the two of us are right.
yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, again, that really, when you think about it, turned out best all around. Churches are struggling these days, you know that. I don't mean to take you into despair, but it's just true. COVID kicked the church in the behind, but we've seen some of that happening all along. So I think when Kathy and I came over here, there were like 270 congregations in our synod. And I think we're down to about 230. So we've lost 40 congregations, maybe.
When this was being constructed, the one thing that you didn't mention was how much volunteer labor was contributed by the members of the church.
Yes, huge. Yeah, we did anything we could do ourselves. So, like painting was big. We painted most of the interior, not this space, but the interior of the building. So a lot of painting done by, the
Well, and even with the organ, we knew that that was coming, so they put the
I'm gonna-
conduits down.
I'm gonna
for
get
that.
to the
Okay.
organ, but yeah, you're right. No, so it's
When it was being
fine.
constructed, so that was
So
done.
just so you have a chance to see these, because the time will grow short, but I have a collection of our directories. And I put some post-it notes here and there for you to check out, because some of them are, I think, significant. So before we had a building, choirs were rehearsing, everything was happening, mostly in our house. Photograph of our first children's choir. There's our daughter Betsy at the far end, but the little girl third from the left is Maritza Turman, who lives in the house next door to us. She grew up next to us, became Betsy's best friend for years.
So you're older than Betsy.
And she now, her grandpa died and left her the house.
So her kids are there.
Below her is a post-it note of an older woman named Marjorie Bear, probably was not in the church maybe more than a dozen times. Was essentially homebound,
She lived at Pheasant Hills.
lived at Pheasant Hill Estates, but she liked to, whatever this is called, needlepoint, I don't know what it's called. But when the ELCA came into existence, each church was to create a banner strip to send to Chicago to be included in a massive banner. So I asked Marjorie if she would do ours. You have no idea what that meant to her. She's in our first directory with her banner strip. Kathy and I took a trip to Chicago in the spring for Aaron Jacob Kirshner's wedding. We traveled to the ELCA headquarters, too big a story to tell, but we looked for this banner.
The building was empty of people, but we found the banner.
I found the banner, and took about 30 minutes to find our banner
Yeah.
strip, but it is there.
All
So
these
that's
banners.
what we're trying.
We have pictures, I have pictures on my phone.
Dave talked about painting the building. There is John Paul painting the building. And I marked a photograph of our first church sign. Joe Bechtel was here for church this morning, first time she's visited the homeland in all
5
these
years.
5 years. There she is hugging somebody during the peace sharing. Anyways, I'll go that way with this one. These are all directories. This directory, I wanted you to see my hot wife. This picture here in the front. She is the hot chick wife, Pastor Chick. And then,
That's why he married me. I mean,
there's so many wonderful pictures here, but I marked a picture of Shelley Crape at that time, taking our first group of young adults to an ELCA National Youth Gathering. So we had 3 girls who went with her, our daughter Johanna, Joe Bechtel, and then a young woman named Rhonda Whitmer. Do you remember the farmer Whitmers
Sid.
from Liverpool? Sid is now in a dementia care center at Messiah Village. I go down to see him. Amy works somewhere in the area. Rhonda and her husband run Sid's chicken farm up in Liverpool. She was a 3-time PIAA triple jump champion.
Yeah.
Crazy athlete. So you can page through as much of these as you want, but. Oh, see this picture? Oops.
Margaret Thorwart and
And?
Tasha Peter.
This is Margaret Thorwart and Tasha Peter. For years, this became the iconic photograph.
It was on our
at Tree of
brochure.
Life. These 2 little girls running, escaping from church. Oh,
Yeah.
go get them, somebody! So, it has some pictures of the building going up here. Guess we're going that way, that one. So here's a photograph of Elizabeth Peter as a little girl. You'll recognize a lot of these kids. And this, on the end, is our choir director, Lindsay Fitzke, as a little girl singing in the choir. Here, I'll go back with those some way.
You know, these are a great archive for the history of male hair loss. Including me.
It doesn't include me, Dave, because I was just as bad back then.
Well, not quite.
And this is the last one. I don't think I marked a lot in the more recent ones, so,
I have all these things.
yeah. So, some other artifacts. There is, the window. It's really, really common for somebody to enter our worship space for the first time and say, "Isn't the window beautiful?" So when we built, we really wanted 3 things that were beyond the scope of the budget. One was the Tree of Life window. We did not want stained glass windows or art
Inside.
glass windows, faceted glass windows the whole way around. We really wanted to be able to see the world while we worship, but we did want a
Coming in and
focal
out.
point up front.
Yeah.
So the window, the hardwood ceiling, and the extended fellowship hall. We managed to get all three of those into the scope of the building plan. The window was designed by Mosak's Art Studio in Lima, Ohio. They met with us. They heard our interest in the window and our thoughts about it. They came back initially with a window design that was a stump with one solitary branch and one leaf growing out of the
Was
stump.
that before Dark Shadows?
So this was,
During Dark Shadows.
this was the Jesse tree from the Old
Yeah.
Testament, the renewal of Israel under the David's covenant. We wanted a depiction of the tree of life that shows up in the prophet Ezekiel and in the book of Revelation. A tree planted with its roots in the water, Susquehanna River. An image of the tree that would be receptive to the Jewish community above us. The tree of life, I said last week, Eitz Chaim, Torah. And then filled with all kinds of images. And one of our members, Michelle Rao, many of you remember her, who was legally blind at that time, was an artist. She asked if she could have a hand at it, and they agreed. So Michelle really is responsible
For that
for
window.
the basic design, and they filled in the pieces, and the tree of life came to be. So, you know, if you step out under the bell tower, you'll see this in bronze, and you can read a full description. I'll pass them around. The other thing that we didn't intend on purchasing, but we wanted eventually, was the church bell. We put the word out to the synod, and a congregation in Selinsgrove, Sharon Lutheran Church, said, hey, we got an old church bell rusting on a grocery store pallet in our alley behind the church. If you want it, come and get it. So a couple of our guys, including one building committee member named Ray Wrights, drove up to see this bell. And they came back, and he was very, very excited. Said, yeah, let's go get the bell. So Ray got a Mack truck. He worked for Harrisburg Mack, every little boy's dream job. And he and somebody else, maybe Gary Glennie, drove up to Selinsgrove and loaded this bell in the back of this truck and brought it down here. We had found one foundry, bell foundry, willing to refurbish this bell. McShane Bell Foundry in Baltimore, who at that time said that they were the only active bell foundry in the United States, and that their primary business came from the U.S. Navy. Good job. You should go on Jeopardy or something.
It was an easy answer.
Was it? Were you in the Navy?
No.
It's just smart.
U.S. Navy, they were their primary customer, but they said, sure, you know, we'll come get it, and we'll do it over, fix it up. So within a couple weeks, they called, and Bill McShane said, Pastor Geib, got the bell, we're working on it, but we are really pretty excited to tell you some information about your bell. We know all about your bell, because we built the bell in the first place. So, cast 1885, that bell, by McShane Bell Foundry in Baltimore. I'm just going to read the print on the plaque. Ready? Rung for first time August 8th, 1885 in Selinsgrove during the memorial service for Ulysses S. Grant, 18th President of the United States. Retired in 1977, given in 1991 to Tree of Life, set into place and rung for the first time October 4th, 1991.
Number of folks took their kids out of school, we took our kids
Yeah,
out,
there were
for
a
the hanging
massive
of the
number
bell.
of
We just had
people
all
who
kinds of
gathered
folks.
all around the
Yeah.
building. And Ray Wrights, who's long since deceased, stood on on the treehouse
Mm-hmm.
property, looking through the fence that was up there while it was hung and run, sobbing.
Yeah.
This was his baby. He
Gary
wanted
Glennie
this so
climbed
bad.
up and rang it.
And
Yeah.
Gary Glennie literally scaled the roof and the bell tower so that he could put his hand on that bell and push it to toll it for the first time. So he'll have that memory forever.
We all cried.
Just to put in perspective, that is 9 years after the country's centennial.
Yeah, wow, yep.
It's 9 years yet to what?
After the
Centennial.
country's centennial. Yeah, 18.
So, it was run here for the first time October 4th, which is St. Francis Day. Weighs over 1,000 pounds, made of bell metal. It's rhymed with the words Gloria in Excelsis Deo. So-
Yeah, he had hair. A lot more than he has.
As we all do.
Yeah.
We dedicated the pipe organ on November 15th, 1998. Oh, running out of time.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. We dedicated it at the 8:30 service on November 15th, but we unveiled it publicly that evening at a service, 7 o'clock. The three organists who came to show it off, Jerry Hoover, Chuck Yoakum, and Bill Heminger. And those of you who know local organists, ring any bells? Bill was at St. Paul Carlisle. Chuck Yoakum occasionally played at Zion Pembroke, was very prominent making the organist circuit. And Jerry Hoover played at Old Zion, Harrisburg, and he was definitely a big hitter. Kathy played the final hymn on the organ. What was it?
What do you think?
Think Lutheran.
Come on.
Mighty Fortress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mighty Fortress.
Mighty Fortress.
Yeah.
We added chimes eventually. We added the antiphonal unit eventually. We added the cymbal
We
stern.
wanted a cymbal
We
stern.
wanted
We
it, we
finally
added
got
that
it.
eventually. The brainchild of this pipe organ was a guy from Elizabethtown, Hershey, named Bob Carball. In the first year of the congregation, people called often and said, "Pastor Geib, do you need an organ?" What they meant was they had a home electric organ that they no longer wanted. And do you have a place for it? We did not. We didn't have a building. So Bob Carball was one of those kinds of calls, and I think, I don't know you, buddy. We don't need an electric organ right now. We don't even have a church. But he said, no, let me clarify. I'd like to build you a pipe organ. Now I thought he was really ridiculous. Who would possibly volunteer that? But Bob Carball was the last remaining employee of what was the Harrisburg Organ Works. He owns a gentleman farm out between Elizabethtown and Hershey. And he has, still to this day,
He's an engineer at Hershey.
was an engineer with
Yeah,
Hershey.
retired.
Now he works for Bruner Organ, whatever. And he had all kinds of organ stock. So he constructed this in his farm with help from Tree of Life members, like Joe Romanak lived down there. You can see Joe's fingerprints everywhere in that organ. Those pipes came from dozens of congregations that closed down and got rid of their organs. So, now that you know that story, if you didn't, every time you hear that play, you are hearing the saints from dozens of congregations who sat in the pews like you and who listened to their beloved instruments and who sang all those wonderful old hymns together. It is goosebumpy. You are literally singing with people from 12, 2 dozen different congregations in greater Pennsylvania from whom those pipes were collected. That pipe organ right there, the 2 consoles up front, that cost Tree of Life $2,000.
Oh, gosh.
He gave it. Yeah, and this work.
We built it all with help from our folks and gave it to us. The only thing we paid for was the stone woodwork to match our pews. What an incredible gift. We did help pay a little bit for the antiphonal, but not a whole lot more. Most of the pipes came from Bob, as well as the chimes. When we upgraded the console to digital, we added the cymbal stern, and people chipped in to pay for that process.
I can tell you all those kids.
Okay, best laid plans, right?
Well, we all knew.
I know. Some of the events and activities, the first adult choir was January 27th, 1988. So we had an adult choir 3 days after our first service of worship. That is, it's stunning that it happened that quickly. 1 week later, we had our first children's choir. It just was
It's
amazing.
big. Yeah, lots of kids.
By the time we moved in, we had a men's quartet, we had a women's ensemble. Eventually, years later, we invested in chimes and bells. At one time, we had 3 different kinds of bell choirs. We had the adult choir, the junior bell choir, and a children's chime choir. It's just, that's a story that I kind of regret. I wish we could, I mean, I don't regret having it, I wish we had it yet, but we'll see. First church picnic was May 15th, 1988, Blue Mountain Lions Club Park. Since then, we've been to Fort Hunter, down to Paxtang, out to Brightville, out to George, and now Seaboard Park. We had Christmas Eve for our 3 years without a building, twice in Old St. Matthew's on Green Street. That's now St. Paul's Episcopal. And the 3rd year was at the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1990. What do Seventh-day Adventists not celebrate? Christmas. The pastor at that time was a guy I met knocking on doors at his church. I went to tell him what I was doing. His name was Jerry Wall. And we had a great visit, had lunch several times before he decided to leave the ministry, but he was still there. And he said, sure, if you need a building, use ours. We're not here. We probably had 50 or 60 people from the Seventh-day Adventist Church
Who came?
singing Christmas carols that evening with us. They had to cover up their big baptismal pool, you know, so nobody stepped in. Lena Weinmeyer, does anybody remember what she sang if you were there? It was the popular hit song of the decade. From a distance. We've had big VBSs. Kathy was the one who planned that. We started originally out in the Lions Club Park, and once we moved in, they became progressively bigger and bigger. I think we maxed out 1 year with 240 participants. Imagine that many children and adults in this building. One of the events that we lost years ago was our annual Memorial Day weekend canoe trip. So that was something that just caught the imagination of the congregation. I went back to see about the records for that. And our biggest year with the canoe trip was 1997. Ready? We took 79 canoers down the Swatara in 28 canoes. We were the Susquehannock Indians, filling it up.
Sometimes, you know, we'd have some of the kids in canoes, and, you know, we'd be at the end of the thing, and it's like, okay. And there's a couple times where the rescue folks had to go
Looking.
and bring them home.
Johanna and her girls almost missed the prom 1 year.
Yeah.
They came back home and didn't even have time to do their
Yeah, there
nails
were
in their
about
hair.
8 or 9 girls in canoes.
But they wanted to do that
Yeah.
more. Our pasta dinners have been a traditional activity here forever, so we always have a pasta dinner associated with our anniversary of
First worship.
first worship in January. The first one was actually out at Epiphany Lutheran Church. We borrowed it for that afternoon. Wonderful member at that time by the name of Al Iacopone made the marinara sauce. He took me down in his basement to his freezer to show me how he was going to make it. He said,
You don't wanna know.
Reverend, gotta come down and see the pasta sauce. This is how I'm gonna make it. He opens up the freezer, and there is an entire cow head.
Goat.
in the- No, it was a cow.
I thought it was a goat.
No, it wasn't made with goat juice, it was made with cow stuff. It was a cow head. And he used that as the base for his marinara sauce. Please do not go home and try that.
It was a fusion. He called it spaghetti sauce.
That was January 20th, 1991. We did that on our 3rd anniversary. That was the first time we did the pasta dinner. Chicken barbecues for years here at the church. We used to start it at the giant food store and where it used to be, so.
But yeah, we did it at the end of the retention pond when we were here.
Pet ministry for years, while our pet ministry committee sometimes thinks that they're really the newest incarnation of that group, because there have been people doing things with pets here for years and years. Kelly and Larry Stroud, if you remember them, now live in Las Vegas, but they led the charge. Kathy and I hosted a intern cluster here. We began here in 1994, just so you know, and we retired from that in 2019 when we were asked to have 2 intern students. Remember Kristen Barnes, and then we
Jennifer.
supervised Jennifer Toburen of it. Yeah. We've also had lots of teaching parish students. Stephanie, this is for you, so you can see. And you are number 27, if I counted right. We have had 27 students. There was 1 year when we didn't get one.
And one of them
2014.
actually became bishop.
Yeah.
That's the
And
year
a
I
couple
came.
years we
Yeah,
had
oh,
2. I'll just
That's the
pass
year I
it
started
around.
coming here.
All right, we're going to have to stop, but we've had seminarians, as you know, many seminarians. We've done amazing service things, Hope Academy, Tree for Hope, the Sudanese Refugee Project, and several refugee families before that. Feeding the 5,000, the church has always been great at that. I just need to read you one paragraph of something that I wrote. I'm going to try and read it to you. This is from 2018. Ready? Someday, for one reason or another, I will no longer be present to share the stories about our early life together, but hopefully some of the artifacts will remain. So our groundbreaking shovel in the narthex,
Above the
TLC
windows.
window, church organ, church bell, attached to rich, wonderful stories. 2 items attached to the anniversary of organization. One is the charter out there, which you should take a look at every now and then and remember the founding family, because many of them are no longer. They sing with the saints in glory, right? So that's on the back wall in the narthex, the wall in the narthex. And the second artifact I think I actually mentioned in the annual meeting is the pen. We have a pen whose ink never runs dry. I used it to sign Amy and
signed,
Mary's
yeah.
document.
And we've signed every baptismal
Every
certificate,
wedding, every baptismal
members.
certificate, every new member has had the pastor's name attached to it in the ink from that pen. It is
It's still
truly-
going.
I have no idea
We don't know.
how it works. Where is it? I'm not telling you because. So here's what I said. It's a jar of oil, manna from heaven, loaves and fish that won't run out. You know, it is crazy, that pen. I don't-
You know how many pens, well, I'm sure you know how many pens I have bought over the last few years.
I'm especially not telling you about it. So, next week we'll talk about stories. Carol during the summer did a few errands for me, preparing for me to do this, counting things like weddings and funerals and baptisms, so that'll be fun to remember. Thanks for coming. If you didn't come to church, come to church.
Applaud this.
That's your redemption.
Put it off this way.